Hello, everyone. Welcome back to What Magic Is This Podcast, a podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. My name is Douglas Batchelor. You know, for the most part, I get fairly good reviews on any of the platforms that will host my podcast. 5 stars all across the board. So many great reviews that sometimes one kind of ignores the good reviews because they're so plentiful. And forgive me for tooting my own horn, but yeah, people seem to love the show. But it's when I get a bad review that really draws my attention. And so I would love to begin this episode by basically talking about a review that I got earlier. Now, this was and is and remains my only review from the country of Poland. So here's what it says. Boring. 2 stars out of 5. Instead of talking about ideas, he mostly digs deep into prehistory of things. Additionally, very unatmospheric. Signed, I Like Asbestos, Poland. So this took me aback because, I mean, the podcast is called What Magic Is This? So we're talking about what kind of magic exists. And I would hope that the history of things would be the more interesting aspect. So in honor of the great I Like Asbestos from Poland, I thought we would do an episode today about an idea. We're going to talk about an idea. So here you go. I Like Asbestos. Choke on this. We're going to be talking today about unverified personal gnosis. And I have the absolute perfect guest for this idea we're going to cover today. And my guest needs no introduction, but in any case, here you go. He is an animist magician, former silversmith, and now author. His books include 6 Ways, Approaches and Entries for Practical Magic, Weaving Fate, Hypersigils, Changing the Past and Telling True Lies, as well as Changeling, a book of qualities. When I get asked by folks which contemporary magical figures one should follow and which book should I read if I want to start doing practical magic, I say Aidan Wachter and his book, 6 Ways. Aidan, you are without a doubt the guest that most people want to have back on What Magic Is This by a huge margin. Welcome back. How are you, sir?
Thank you for that. I'm awesome. I'm doing really good. It's a good moment in time for me.
Good. Amazing to hear that. Amazing to hear that. So let's jump right in there. Aidan, what does gnosis mean to you? Because this is a term that gets thrown around so much. And I hear it applied to what one feels when one gets to a point of meditation. I've heard it applied to revelation that one can have when doing a ritual. It's applied all over the board. So I wanted to ask you, because we're talking about unverified personal gnosis. Before we jump the gun here, let's talk about gnosis itself. So what does gnosis mean to you?
To me, gnosis is simply what you know based on experience, and specifically because we're talking about it, I don't really see that it's used outside of kind of spiritual contexts.
Right.
That it's not actually defined by any attempts at and isn't reliant on external proof or logic. It's simply the thing that you know because it's something that you experienced.
Right. Right. And is it one of those things where would you consider it something that you can like activate, like gnosis is activated by certain stimuli, or is it more nuanced than that?
I think it's way more nuanced than that because at least in my experience, I think I've had more experiences of gnosis when I didn't really try to do that.
Right.
It's definitely one of those grasping at smoke kind of things.
Yeah. It's funny because when one looks or goes to certain places online and online discussion forums, people will say like, well, I do this ritual and then I enter gnosis. Enter gnosis is like enter gnosis. How did I? Okay, so that seems very vague. And then they list a whole bunch of other stuff. So,
well, I think that kind of came out of the kind of Peter Carroll early days of chaos magic, because they were really viewing this as like they were using it, I think, more in the context of like altered state.
Yeah.
And that's not, I think, how it's generally used. I think it's easier just to say there's this altered state, and in that altered state, you might experience gnosis.
Yes.
But these two things are not in any way equivalent.
For sure. So people might be asking, what on earth is this unverified personal gnosis? Or we're going to use the short form UPG because it gets tiresome saying unverified personal gnosis. And some of you might be like, I know exactly what that is. And some of you might be like, huh, what are they talking about? So unverified personal gnosis, this is the definition. It is a belief gained through personal subjective experience, which are not things confirmed by traditions or in groups. They usually inform the belief system of those that experience them. Would you say that that's a good definition of UPG? Do you have a definition that you apply for yourself on this?
No, I think that's dead on. I would say that and we'll kind of, I think we'll probably get into this later, but there's a point where these things do actually occur in group levels. But it's also, you're kind of out of it in my read, and this doesn't mean I'm right, but when you get to that it has to be, because it's personal, it has to be this specific thing that's happening to the individual.
Right. Okay. For folks that might be scratching their head a little bit so far, can you give an example, either a personal one or just a general example of unverified personal gnosis?
Yeah. So the easiest way, most of my experience with spirits that is easily kind of shareable is stuff that happens in trance for me, because I'm not particularly visual. I don't hear them generally. My allies and I have a way of communicating, or a bunch of ways, but it's not that clean. So I would say that if I'm in trance and I meet a spirit and it tells me something or performs some kind of an operation on me or with me, that experience is UPG, as is something, and this is where it kind of separates out from that altered state. So say that I'm a card reader, and over time I realize, or even somebody who just gets a lot of readings, and I realize that regardless of what any of the traditional meanings or what the reader is telling me about the Eight of Swords when it comes up, that I learned that what that means is run like hell.
Right.
That's my personal gnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that's what the card means.
Right.
This is the communication to me. I've learned what this sentence means to me in a sense,
Perfect. Wonderful. Yeah, great example. I think another example that would be pertinent for folks is, for those that don't know, um, there's this tradition of saints, some saints being depicted with a dog head, right? They have the head of a dog. Saint Christopher being one of them. Particularly, the further east you go, you'll see Saint Christopher depicted with a dog's head. And another thing that can occur is that, wow, that looks very similar to that Egyptian god Anubis, right? And so if one was to do some workings perhaps with St. Christopher, and then Anubis shows up, poof, right there. It says, by the way, I am part of this tradition. I am this dog-headed spirit agency that we have is the same thing. And then you're like, wow, that's incredible. And so you mark that in your head. It's like, well, this is St. Christopher is similar to Anubis, which is similar to Hermanubis, which is similar. So this is all one thing. The only way, there's no written anywhere factual thing that says that Anubis is the same as St. Christopher at all. You gained that by the fact that something occurred to you while in ritual. So I have to ask you this: what makes something not UPG? Just if it's not written down?
Oh man. It's not necessarily that it's not written down. It's that again, I'm going to bring it back to the personal aspect of this is the most important term. And so it's not only that it's not necessarily accepted as true by the group, it's that it might be completely irrelevant to anyone else. Mm-hmm. It's not, yeah, I mean, that's the best way I would say. So we often see it in relationship to, we have to kind of bring this up. So this is a good place.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
So UPG is less so than it was, but when this kind of came onto the scene in the magical social media world quite some time ago,
yeah,
it really came in as a slur.
Yes.
This was like a straight up slur. Oh, well, that's your UPG, bitch. You know? And therefore, it's meaningless.
Yeah, yeah.
Your experience is invalid, which runs counter to the entire way that I work. So I always found it really weird because I was like, what the fuck? It's like, come on, we're trying to have these personal experiences. Otherwise, what are we doing here? And so, yeah, it's not that it's just not written down. It might be something really counter to what's written down.
Right.
It may be something utterly unrelated to anything where you can't find a shit about it. Like, I don't think other than me and a bunch of other kind of people balanced in between the witchcraft world and the kind of Norse pagan world,
Sure.
I don't think we're ever going to find something that suggests that there is a connection between Odin and Hecate.
Right.
But for a bunch of us, there is.
Yeah.
And it's very clear, it's very logical, but
Sure.
not in the sense of kind of cognition, let's come up with the argument here.
Right.
It's simply like ritually, magically, spiritually, when you have that kind of thing click, you go like, oh, yeah, that works. I don't know why. And you could spend, decades in every library on the planet trying to come up with like, well, there's some death stuff in there, there's some crossroads stuff in there.
Yeah.
But still you're like, but that's like we're coming up with rationalizations to try and explain something.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it's not UPG is that it's not personal.
Right. It's interesting that you bring up the fact because I was around when that was occurring, when UPG was used as it was used as a denigration for people's experiences, right? And I even recently I just saw something that says like, I hate UPG. It's I unless there's something that accounts for it, or unless there's two connected points, then you shouldn't even be talking about it. You shouldn't even be sharing it. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like this. Do you pay attention? Have you read anything from mystics and mysticism, the founding of every major religion that has ever been? And things get dicey because we live in, this is a discussion we could probably have a little bit further on up the line, but it gets into things now where when people promulgate their UPG as truth, and particularly when they're selling products, I can understand why people will be like, UPG definitely is one of those things where one has to be cautious. So to switch gears here, is UPG just a fancy way of saying my opinion? Does it just be like, yeah, this is what I think. So Anubis and Hermanubis and Saint Christopher are the same to me. That's my opinion. And that's just what I say.
And I think that is the actual correct way that you would say that if this is kind of something that you've come about with, and this is that you've come up with your thought process. We can kind of look at a great example of this. If we aren't looking at it as a cipher, which I think it really should be looked as a cipher, but if we look at the first few Kenneth Grant books, that he's doing this as if it's just known.
Right.
He's continuously in the footnotes. Well, this is this, is this, is this, is this. I think it's a cipher. I think he's really just like, he wanted to make this difficult. And so he's like, let's see if these motherfuckers will cross-reference all this bullshit that I'm talking.
Right.
I do think that that's where he started.
Fun books, I have to say. Fun stuff.
Great. The most fun books. I'm a huge fan of, maybe the first 5.
Yeah.
After that, I kind of lost track, but I really enjoyed them. Opinion is not gnosis.
Right.
It's like almost the counter to gnosis. Right. Because opinion is this thing that we often say people don't change their opinions, but obviously this happens all the time. It's not true. It's difficult for you to change someone's opinion because that's something that's inside of them. But I think the opinion is this very mutable collection of what we think, what we feel, how these things interact, connect to our worldview, all this stuff. And while those things are really important, gnosis to me is this much deeper strata that is based on, and we get into the other world, it's like it's personal and it's experiential. Opinion doesn't have to be experiential.
Right.
Lots of people have opinions about what it's like. Let's say we can be more explicit. Lots of men have opinions about what it's like to be a woman.
Yeah.
Lots of white folks have opinions about what it's like to be a person of color. It's all crap.
Yeah.
Those people are actually in a Gnostic experience of this. They know based upon their personal experience.
Yeah.
And so opinion is a different thing. And I was thinking about this one, and what I came up with is that we can think that Thor is the coolest Norse god. And that's my opinion.
Sure.
But if Loki comes to me in a trance and actually teaches me something, that's personal gnosis.
Got it. I like that distinction. That's a very good distinction. And yeah, I want people to sit with that for a little bit. That's very, very well put in. And let's step into the realm of speculation because I want to hang on this one for a little bit. So, does everything in this magical spiritual realm start with UPG? Does it all start with like because there's very few people that are sitting around going through some kind of a ritual or something like that, and then out of nowhere a tradition is born. Usually it's an individual who has an experience and wants to share it, and in the sharing of that some kind of current is tapped into, and then people also become, and it so does it start at the individual level? Does everything seemingly, and we can even go so far as to speculate about the major world religions and things of that variety, but um, so let's stick somewhat broadly with this one. Does everything, as far as this kind of the mythology, the rituals, the practices, the traditions, does it all usually start at an individual UPG? Do you think?
I think so. I can't see how it wouldn't.
Right.
Um, in where we do see that is more in not in kind of spiritual kind of communities or however we want to call that, but we see it more in kind of ideological groupings. Like those tend to be coming out of let's kind of look at a bunch of different data, whether it's good or bad or in between. It doesn't matter. That's not really relevant to what we're talking about. And let's see if we can come up with kind of this unifying theory, and then we're going to build this ideology based upon that. Whereas I think everything on the spiritual level that I can think of is coming from that personal experience of whatever we call it, whether that's God or the gods or the world. Even energy stuff. Like if I think about energy practices from any place, somebody had to have noticed at some point, like, hey, if I do this kind of process, there's this change in some aspect of my being. What is that?
Right.
Can I do that again? That was really cool. And then they play with that, and then eventually they share it. And then eventually you come up with these really complex systems like Chinese medicine or Taoist alchemy or, Hindu chakra stuff. But I think it all has to start from that trigger that's UPG.
Do you think that there's that it occurs and is still occurring to this day, this idea of simultaneous collective gnosis? Like, do you have any examples that you can think of looking back in history? 'Cause I've got a weird one that I'll share in a little bit, but I wanted to ask you if you think that this is something that, like it does occur.
Well, where I think, and this is kind of tied into something that we were talking about a little bit earlier, is part of where we have to look at that, I think, is did it happen independently of tradition?
Right.
Because part of what traditions do is they kind of provide or teach or work towards kind of a congruence of not necessarily the experience, but how it's described.
Right.
And so where we see things, people go like, yeah, but my entire coven that's been working together for 20 years all had this experience. It's like, well, you've had 20 years of measuring this stuff, hashing it out, and kind of coming up with a language. And if this event had happened on day one, would you have been in as much agreement about what happened? So it's an interesting one. I've seen things that are like that, but I haven't seen anything that I would really say are it outside of those kinds of systems and traditions. And that's a feature of the system. That's what that's what they're trying to do. So you're trying to come up with you're trying to generate a group mind art.
I want to put this out there and maybe get your opinion on it. I've been very fascinated, particularly more so blatantly out on the podcast, with the religiosity of UFOs and the religiosity of the experience of people who experience this thing. And if you do any period of time of listening to groups of people who have seen something incredibly uncanny in the sky, that is about as close as I can in this day and age to point to something that looks like some kind of a collective simultaneous gnosis. The way that they talk about how everything changed, and how they saw just how small they were. And this can occur to folks that are just on a hunting trip or a fishing trip. Like this, it's about as close as we get right now to an untethered to tradition. Although some could argue that the whole idea of UFOs in this day and age is some kind of a nascent religious tradition. But for even people that aren't interested in UFOs, they'll be on a fishing trip, and then there'll be 6 of them, and then something will occur, and they all talk about just how religious and how it changed everything for them. And they'll talk about it in an almost gnosis-like terms as something that occurred. And I think that that's kind of like the kink in the system is crazy supernatural phenomena, paranormal natural phenomena is where a lot of our religious traditions, some of them can be pointed to miracles and miraculous events and things of that variety. But what do you think about the religiosity of UFOs and in them being able to provide some kind of a group, collective, simultaneous gnosis?
So I have to say I know very little about that world. It's not any place I've ever spent time, but it did actually bring up an interesting point that I would kind of throw into this collective gnosis. Because again, I got to stick with what I've had experience of, which was, and we talked about it in the spirits thing, probably. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. But my experience with the Man in Black happened well before I had any knowledge of any of that. I'm sure I had never heard of that. I had definitely never looked at any witch trials documents when I was 11. Listening to Aerosmith and getting high. My primary entertainment. Then when I actually came across that stuff, it was crystal clear. Like, oh, that was that. Mm-hmm. So that's the closest that I have, is going like, I do think that there's these things that happen. Actually, I have a really interesting question that just popped up in my mind about that. That is not one you could answer, but it's kind of an interesting point. I wonder if this is why I have such an aversion to reading about magic. Because I actually want to experience it before I do any study. Mm-hmm. Like, there was a period where I studied like hell early on, but for a long time I've been like, oh, it's like I don't even want to hear about it, because it's I want that stuff to come in as clean as it can, even with all the exposure that I have, which might tie into something I know we're going to talk on later. So, and there's also tied into that, and it may be something that came up in the spirits thing again. There are places that have spiritual energies attached to them that are not kind of known power spots, right? So we have these all over, England. We've got these all over the world in different places. Like, I had crazy spiritual experiences up in Mount Shasta. This is a known zone for that. Things like Sedona in the US are also places like this. But we have these in cities a lot of the times, where there are enough magical practitioners or kind of psychically tuned in people to notice. Right. They're not on any maps. They're not in any books. But it's like, if you talk to somebody that lived in your neighborhood and you go like, What about that street corner across from the liquor store? And everybody that's sensitive is like, oh, that's fucking gnarly.
Yeah, yeah.
I crossed the street. Like, I walked through that like 3 times and it was so nasty. I don't do it. So that's a way that you could say that's a form of collective gnosis, because that's
Right.
people having this experience without any pre prep. They have
Right.
not prepped to have it.
Yeah.
It's not fitting into a tradition. Like that little shitty corner of your city is not on anybody's map. It's like, ooh, power spot.
Right.
There's a nasty fucking lick there, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I do tend to go back to what I was saying. I do tend to think that a lot of people are primed for even things like UFO experiences. All of our sci-fi movies have UFOs. Like I think in some way how the phenomenon manifests, people are primed for it. But I try not to look at the paranormal kind of detail aspects of the what they saw, but more so how it was experienced. And to me, it's just like that's one of the best ways of looking at things, where it's like, wow, like I can see how traditions start. Like we can see how these things get rolling, because these people are talking about this experience and it has touched them deeply to the point where it changes their opinions, it changes the way they operate and they live their life. It is a spiritual Gnostic experience, and yeah, it's fascinating for me to look into. But we'll switch gears here. Yeah, this is I spent 2 months, Aidan, working on one episode of my podcast on UFOs, and I've been looking into UFOs my entire life, but just recently going back in there, it's like it's funny when one starts looking at UFOs and they take a break and then they kind of come back to it, and it's like, oh, particularly as one becomes a practical magician, it's like, oh, there's just so many parallels. Highly recommend for every person who's involved in magic, look into UFOs. If you haven't listened to my episode, this not just you, Aidan, everybody. It's as magical practitioners, I think we owe it to ourselves. We have to look into UFOs. I believe they really are important.
And I think there's some cool stuff in there.
Yeah.
This is tied into that same subject before we move on, which is we can also kind of look at, for all of his obvious flaws as a person, we can look at someone like H.P. Lovecraft. And H.P. Lovecraft's work, I think, tapped into something that people have felt for a long time, right?
Yeah.
But what that kind of did was it kind of codified it into a language set, into this set of spirits, into this set of how you describe those experiences.
Yeah.
And then this obviously moves into Grant and other stuff, but and so it's kind of an interesting thing. So that wasn't new.
No.
Like I think that his sense of this kind of existential, beyond this world dread,
Yeah.
is a very common thing. But I think when you begin to provide language to it, and this is kind of how it ties into the UFO thing, I think, then it becomes more likely that people are going to have those experiences and immediately draw that connection.
For sure.
It's like if I have something there's no way at this junction in my life that if I connect to something that has that kind of like existential dread, elder god weirdness to it, I'm not going to go there in my mind.
Right.
And so we have to be aware that, yeah, everything gets shaded, but that doesn't mean that what's underneath it isn't very real.
And it's funny when sometimes I hear magicians say, I don't do mythology. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like mythology and where we get our stories from. These things sometimes they tie in so much to everything we do, and the term UPG itself will be applied a lot of times. If you go to Google and type in UPG or Unverified Personal Gnosis, a lot of time you're going to get things popping up for neo-paganism, and more specifically tied to traditions that may or may not use magic, but I'm going to say they're a bit more northern pagan, because we don't have a lot of things written down, and we do have a lot of people speculating about what certain gods did, and kind of one of the only thing that people have is the mythology to go off the eddas and things of that variety. And so a lot of times they will have experiences based on the kinds of things that are in the mythology that we do have. So the written word is kind of like a prompt for these experiences. Do you think that there's something behind that?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's really interesting. I think that's a hugely interesting thing, because it's also, you can see how it gets stratified, right? Like what part of that mythology is interesting. And I've talked about this a lot with, Lonnie Scott in particular, because he's, big in the kind of super open, kind of high diversity view of heathenry. And he's got a background in chaos magic, and he's just an all around fucking sharp dude on this stuff and has been in it forever. That you like look at it and you go, okay, there's a little tiny chunk of the Odin mythology where Odin is this kind of war god.
Right.
And there's a whole collection of people that attach to that. But if you look at the whole thing and you're more comfortable with ambiguity, you go like, this is a weird fucking god. Like, this is really the god of high strangeness, like, in his world. It's almost like, it's like, there's this kind of, there's also this view of like, there's this view of Loki as this destructive force that gets kind of, because you have this kind of like almost Jupiterian view of Odin in a lot of cases versus what I would put in as more kind of Mercury Uranian view, which makes more sense to me. That people go like, oh yeah, like Loki's this god of chaos. And I'm like, did you look at the guy he's working against, right? Like, that guy's not really the god of stability.
Right.
And so I think, yeah, you look at the myths, but you also have to realize, and this is particularly true in the northern stuff, that we don't have them in a raw form, and we rarely do. And this is also where I get kind of down on the people who go crazy, like, it's not in the mythology. And you go, well, how clean's the mythology?
Right. Yeah.
And what happened in the previous thousands of years before the mythology got codified as it is?
Who is telling the stories? Yeah.
There's back history.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Asbestos Eater or whatever your name was, but
I like asbestos. Asbestos.
But the backstory is much deeper, which is one of the kind of themes that runs through all my work. Is like, understand that we can use all this stuff, but we've been at this for a long time.
For sure.
And it's not. It's decidedly not in the kind of boxes we want to put it in these days, because we kind of ended up into this very different zone of things. And if you move into that, you're like, wow, you're in this really fluid reality where you think about early days Iceland. Like, these people were coming from different parts of Scandinavia. They might have had the unfortunate thing of coming from Ireland right before then, but, which was probably a different kind of personal gnosis. But, and these are people who are like farmers and fishermen out in a really rough fucking zone. Yeah. They're probably not having much really specific agreement about the spirits that they meet.
Right.
Like, yeah, you're gonna meet the spirit at that waterfall or at that hot spring or at that river, but you don't have anybody to bounce this off of, and you certainly don't have any books to like go reference. You can't get on Google, so your best bet is you go and like talk to that weird ass dude that lives in the hut out there and go, have you been to that spring? And they're like, oh yeah, it's fucking weird, so it's it's just interesting. I do think you got to look at the old stuff, but you got to be really aware that it's all filtered.
Yeah, particularly about who's doing the writing. And this opens up an enormous can of worms where a lot of this stuff is written by Christians, people that think that this belief system is these belief systems are foolish, demonic in some way. The people doing the transcribing, they change a lot. These things always are changing, and I think that when the idea of UPG, as you talk about, was being used as a bit of a degradation of people's experiences, that was kind of when I saw like the peak period of when people were really trying to keep things in boxes. I think we've moved beyond that. Now we're just going to be like, okay, there is such thing as cultural appropriation and appropriation of certain things, but we also have, the pendulum can swing too far where it's just like, we need to realize that a syncreticism has occurred throughout history with these beliefs, and everything is not as neat and tidy as we'd ever like to think it is. In fact, it is when things are blended and mixing and when the box has been opened and the contents have been spilled all out, that is when we have our brightest moments us as ritual magicians and as spiritual people and as mystics is when there has been no boxes and when everything is on the floor and everybody's just playing with them and everything is great. So anyways, that's my little
No, I'm with you.
yeah. Let's talk about the people though that want to say that UPG perhaps isn't all that it's cracked up to be, because we can get bogged down in that whole idea of scientific illuminism that was a big hit with Thelemites, where it's the method of science, the aim of religion paradigm. And one can go to the lengths where they just basically say that if it's not written down, if it's not in a grimoire, I love my grimoires. Aidan knows this is like that's where I get a lot of my stuff. It's wonderful. But if one does do the grimoire evocation the exact way that it is written, and then they got the results, it's like I did the magic exactly, did everything, did all the consecrations is the way it is, and then I saw a thing that's proving that this is not UPG. Do you think that there's a downside to that whole idea of like if it's not done like the scientific method, it doesn't exist and therefore it's not true?
I'm sure that works for some people.
Right.
It is entirely counter to the way that I work.
Right. Yeah.
I early on was looking to magic to give me an explanation of things as I saw them and as I was experiencing them. And I never actually found that. That did not happen. But what did happen was my questions shifted to show me how this works for me. And then all of that UPG that came out of that and all of that work that really led me into deep connection with my allies, who I just call the peeps for the most part these days, make it, well, it's also just how I talk, but to make it less of a thing. Like, I don't think should be a thing that we put on the pedestal. Right. Like, this is as normal, or the goal is to have it be as normal as you and I hopping on Zoom and having a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not as clear. Right. In my case, it's never that clear. But I think that super kind of push towards you got to do it exactly this way. And I really remember, like, I was really pleased to see that, like, when I started looking at grimoire stuff, when I came back to magic in the kind of the public world of magic around 2010, 2011, I was like, oh, good. People are actually putting forward like alternative ways to do grimoire evocation.
Right. Yeah.
Because the folks that I knew that did that were in general like so hardcore, usually until it said you needed X amount of gold or something to make the talisman, and then they would allow it to be fudged.
Right.
And that it was just this, it was kind of Kenneth Grant eldritch horror if you didn't do that, you know?
Right.
It's like, that's how you're going to let in the fucking Cthulhu thing, and it's yeah. Destroy the universe. It's like, you wish, you know? But, and so I think that I have cognitive biases. I have tons of them. I know what some of them are, and I try and keep them in mind. There's some I don't know what they are, and hopefully they will show themselves clear enough to me that I'll be able to work with them a little bit better. But I think that, to me, that kind of hard push to make this essentially maybe not entirely internal experience, but where its importance is entirely internal, into something that you can repeat in a lab kind of setting.
Right.
Just missing the point. And I understand that may not be everybody's experience, and I'm not telling you you're wrong if that's not how you work, but to me, that's what that is. It's like, no, this is about the things that are beyond that.
Right.
This is about the reality that is beyond what we can prove.
Right.
This is the reality that lies behind. It's saying, hey, maybe reality isn't what you think it is.
Right.
And to me, that kind of, those two things don't go very well together.
For sure. Yeah, here's my 2 cents on the entire thing. I would like to believe and I'm going to stick specifically with the idea of grimoires. I'd like to believe that this wasn't just a literary convention, that people were writing these things down just because they wanted to show people that they were creepy, rich edgelords and they have a library of evil books. I like to actually think that people were using these things, right? Like, and we have marginalia notes, where people are like, I did these things, or this is the kind of stuff that happened. So when I did it, I wanted to I wanted to see that things were going to happen. Maybe not the specifically that a demon would appear before me and then would tell me what's going to happen in the stars and things of that variety, but I wanted stuff to happen. And so I tinker around and I find stuff to happen. But I found that, and again, this is specifically, and this is not what this episode is about, but I'm just going to share it anyways, is that I found that by veering a little bit to my personal way of working was more fruitful and provided me with a very specific phenomenon. Not as specific as it said it was going to be in the grimoire, but a phenomenon nevertheless. So when people ask me, and they often do, should I use grimoires because they actually work? I will, but I won't say do it exactly by the book and have the idea of the scientific method when you approach it, and just tinker around, because UPG is going to happen. But it doesn't make that your experiences, because you used a grimoire from the 17th century, more valid than other people's rituals who don't use grimoires, right? I understand that you, Aidan, you tinkered a bit with it, and you're like, you said your allies absolutely don't like that stuff. Like, no, not for me, not here. Cool. But I still will tell people, like, you will have gnosis experiences. You will have your own UPG when you tinker with this stuff. And that's one of the reasons that I believe that these things do exist. Whether that suits you specifically, that's a whole different debate. That's something that I found it very fruitful for myself. I know others don't, but that's basically what I will say as far as that kind of stuff. But I don't approach it, though, as if it's like you have to do everything the way that it's written. And it's because it's written down by some, horribly rich, sexist landowner who had a ton of money and wanted to have a spooky library.
Well, and I think also, it's just to throw out, kind of coming to UPG, it tied into that. Like, some of the most intense UPG I've ever had, when I was like really not in an altered state, going back to that, happened in the British Library and in the British Museum in 1990. And I had Words from Temple Press who had given me a pass, as did a guy that taught at UC Santa Cruz who was interested in D, had written me recommendations. And so they gave me an all-access pass to the North Library. And I went and got a couple of D's books that he had interleaved notes in.
Crazy.
And those things were gnarly.
Yeah.
Like, there was no question. I can't read the shit.
No.
But it's like, hey, you hand me the book. It's like, there's something here. You get to the actual pages that he wrote in. It's like, oh, bro was into something.
Right.
And that was just like pure. And again, I'm very not generally what I would qualify as psychically sensitive.
Right. Okay.
And I have aphantasia. I don't have an internal screen, so I don't see stuff. Unless I'm in extremely deep trance is the only way I can get around that. And then when I went into the actual British Museum, and they had the sigil of Ameth and his mirror and all that, I saw him in the mirror.
Okay.
Like, looking back. And I'm not high. I'm not, again, I'm not sensitive.
Right.
I am not into Enochian magic. I knew people who were, which is why I was checking the shit out.
Yeah.
And I'd been present for rituals, but they pretty much put me to sleep. I had weird dreams, but and so those things are in a way you go like, that's a connect that I can't prove.
Right.
Later, I then read, I think in Egypt by Crowley, which I think is by the other Crowley.
Yeah, that's right. John Crowley, great author.
Yeah, several years later, I read an account where someone sees D in that mirror, but I know I had not read that when that happened.
Okay.
So then you go, ooh, is that thing? Did he actually have that experience that I had and then wrote about it, which would be an experience of collective gnosis, right? Now, should anybody else believe me about that? I don't know.
Okay.
You don't know that I didn't read that before. I do. You don't. So,
Sure. Yeah. Very interesting. But have you seen the pendulum swing the other way though, where some people will be so into their UPG that they become, there's no other way to put it, that they become delusional to the point of insanity where they're accusing others of just being like, you can't see my truth. Like this is the way that it is, because it's tough, because at some point you have to believe what you have to believe. If you're doing this stuff and you're doing it properly, in huge air quotes, you will be given messages that are going to be wild and contradictory and just all over the place. And some people will just share all of it. And to the point where sometimes you're just like, what is going on here? Like, have you seen this occur?
absolutely. There's this weird borderline here, and it's probably, you know, I'm just getting into. I'm not an astrology guy, but I've had some really kind of freakishly valuable experiences with human design.
Okay.
And people interpreting that for me.
Right.
And a few people looking at, or someone looking at fixed star stuff for me in relationship to some of my experiences.
Right.
So perhaps this is something that could be defined as something that happens in there. Like this could be a thing in your human design or in your, whatever the stars were doing when you were made,
Yeah.
That has you really going like, not only do I want to share this, but I need you to accept it.
Right.
Which is where you're going like, so my UPG needs to become your truth.
Yeah.
And that's, the joke I have about this is, the ancient Taoists spoke of this as the way of the cult. And in more modern, like New Age terms, they refer to this as guruitis.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. It's like, you really got to dive in there and go, is this for anybody else? And if so, is there anything is there even a way to share it where it could be useful? Because just going, I saw this is what it was, now you got to live according to that, is ridiculous. And it's not a good look. It's not attractive. And a lot of people who practice fall into this for a year or two.
Yeah.
Where you're really like, I have seen ultimate reality. It's like, okay, awesome. Why don't you go
get in line?
Why don't you go get a job for the next couple of years and then
we're going to circle back to best practices in a little bit, but yeah, it's the two. It's not a binary, but the two things is where it's like you can get to the point where unless it's accounted for, it's in a tradition, your UPG doesn't exist. But if it's written down and it's got some historicity to it, then it has some validity. If there's a connecting dot through something that is written or some kind of tradition, then it's true. On the other side, it's just like none of what you're saying is at any point true, but you need it to be true and you're sharing it with everybody. There's nuance there, of course. We're going to circle back to like some of the better things to do with UPG, first personally and otherwise. Yeah.
I totally see that, and I think there's this belief where we go, it happens all the time, and I'm guilty of it, and have hopefully been more guilty of it in the past than I am now. But where we see 2 points, right, and we go, okay, now we got the line, we can follow the trajectory, right? But sometimes those 2 points are like stars in a constellation. Right. No. And you're like, they aren't on a flat plane. This isn't a trajectory. This is this whole, 3D thing that you were just seeing from here.
That's right.
Go look at that you look at that constellation from as far away on the other side of the fucking galaxy. Yeah. Is it still the same constellation? Are you still seeing the same trajectory? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if what we have as far as like these extremes or whatever kind of line that they exist is the two sides of unverified personal gnosis, then what we're truly talking about is truth. and be it personal or collective. So, do you think, Aidan, that truth is relative?
Absolutely. Which is, of course, a joke, but uh, uh, I think that it's reasonable to think, from given where we are, that there is something like ultimate reality. But I think it's really unreasonable to think that we are the ones who have the ability to recognize it, even if we saw it.
Right.
You know, I just don't see that as very likely. My favorite comment about this is truth and objectivity are really related things. And my favorite, and I've used it probably in multiple, it's probably in at least two of my books. I don't know. But somebody said many years ago to me that many things exist, but objectivity is not one of them.
Right.
Uh, yeah. And I think that's pretty true, at least for us as, human spirit beings. It's like, so I don't see how truth wouldn't be relative.
Yeah.
Because kind of everything is. It's positional, right? Like, where are you looking at it from?
Yeah.
Because it's just not. It's not the same. Like, are you to the west of me? Theoretically, if we're looking at the shortest path, but you're also to the east of me.
Mm-hmm. It's something that really stuck with me with reading Jeffrey Kripal's newest work, and it's been very hard for me to shake. But and he just throws it off as such an easy sentence, because there's a lot of people that say that the truth is relative because there's no such thing as truth, and I don't think that. And I go with what Jeffrey Kripal has to say, is that the truth is relative, not because there's no truth, but because there are so many truths. And I think that it's not that the truths are all converging onto one point that has to be ultimate consciousness. I just think that the way that we interact at this really strange experience reveals so much that is true, that one has to negotiate where truth enters into their understandings of the world. And we're getting very philosophical here right now, but um, I think that there, if, as does there exist an absolute truth? No, but that we can have this wonderful menagerie, this kaleidoscopic variety of truth that's actually really quite beautiful. And when one's able to get rid of this idea that everything has to be objective, I think that's one of the best cures. And it drives skeptics crazy when you say stuff like this. Like, if you talk to anybody who's even second year philosophy student, you will watch their eyes start bleeding when you start to talk about this kind of stuff. But I think, yeah, the truth is relative because there's just so many ways of arriving at it. It's
Yeah, and I think and I also agree with that. I've not read much Kripal, but I agree with that idea. The issue is there no such thing as truth, or is truth perhaps very multifaceted?
right.
And does it perhaps show many different faces? Because it's very clear that to me, just in my life, I can see things that were clearly bad that happened in my life.
Right.
10 years later, I see them as very good.
Yeah.
Because it's this process of learning. It's like, yes, it wrecked me. And from that wreckage, I came out better. Does this mean that my initial response that I should have been cheering on these terrible events? Like, I don't think so. I think that was correct at that moment.
Yeah.
I was correct to go like, oh man, I am fucked, but then again, way on the other side of it, you're like, oh, that was really great. Both are true.
Yeah. Very much so. Yeah. Things get sticky though, Aidan, because we hear the expression, and this is not just something that you hear within spiritual and mystical and magical circles, but we hear people saying, I'm speaking my truth. Like, you can't argue against me about what's happening because I'm speaking my truth. Do we have to accept everyone's claims if this is the case? Can nothing be criticized if they're saying something like, I'm speaking my truth? This is my UPG. How dare you say, Aidan, that there's no connection between Anubis, the jackal-headed Egyptian god, and Saint Christopher, the dog-headed saint? Like, how dare you say that I'm speaking my truth because Anubis came to me while I was doing a ritual and said it was so?
I come in. This is one of the things that I get really irritated about, as far as like we're in a moment where, because of social media, largely, I think there's this game of weaponizing language and speaking your truth, as I understood it when I first heard that term, was about expressing kind of your deepest experience. And so I heard this first probably from women,
Right.
who are trying to get, I don't think it was me, it could have been, I don't know, uh, somebody who had not had their experience to just go like, look, bro, my experience is radically different than yours.
Yeah.
And you need to hear it. Not that you need to experience it the same way. Now it seems like a lot of the time when this comes up, and particularly in spiritual circles, this is my experience and you need to agree with me.
Right.
Which goes back to that thing of like trying to force your personal gnosis down somebody's throat. It's not beneficial to anybody, because theoretically we're all trying to have these experiences so we can come to what is true for us.
Right.
And so kind of just the same that I am a dick if I don't listen to women about their experience, or listen to people of color about their experience and go, well, that's not my experience, and I don't think your experience should be like that, based on my experience not being either of these people. I'm just being a dick.
Yeah.
And so I used to be worse about this around magical stuff, because I used to be much more hard-headed that what I was experiencing was the right way.
Right. Yeah.
And over time, I got a lot smarter, I hope, and also softened a lot and went like, oh, I can just hear this. And I don't actually have to be opinionated about it. I can just hear it and go, wow, Douglas, that's really fascinating. And maybe if it makes sense, or you ask, I could go like, no, that's not really how it's gone for me. But I don't need to come at it combatively. I don't need to shut you down. Douglas, I had this experience, and you don't get to have any thoughts about it except the ones I tell you to, right? Which is how often this gets, again, weaponized. And I think it's just, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, but some part of it, though, goes to the place where, and I'm not speaking as if like this is something that I find is a problem in the world. I'm just being, devil's advocate for a second here, is that some would argue that that means that we can't criticize anything any more than anybody says. Like we can't actually say, like, somebody says, I'm speaking my truth, this is the kind of thing that I saw, you cannot question it. If somebody was to be like, no, that's utter horseshit. Maybe not in that exact terminology, but just be like, I don't think you got that right. The immediate the reaction will be like, well, I was speaking my truth. You cannot say such things. So when does something tip into the criticizable category? How does one navigate that?
Again, I'm kind of like, I'm in a different place than I used to be. And there's a great example of this. So when the Thor movie came out,
which one? I haven't seen a single one of them, but there's a lot.
First of the modern Thor movies.
Okay, all right.
And Tom Hiddleston played Loki. There was this immense explosion on social media of people who are now Loki wives.
Okay, what?
Oh yeah, I'm having all of these visions of Loki. We have this amazing sex. He is now my patron. And you get really interesting that until we had Tom Hiddleston really good in that role, this didn't happen. And I was a dick about this. I straight up admit I never said it to anybody that wasn't a close friend, but like, yes, I referred to these people as Loki fuckers. Like, okay, the Loki fuckers are out of their minds, right?
Okay.
No, I'm like, I don't know that that's right. I don't care what you do
right
with your gods in whatever form they show up. So that was wrong. I shouldn't have used that language even internally. I was being a dick.
Funny as it is, but
funny as it is, I was still being a dick, and it's not appropriate. But who am I to say that some power did not see an opening, much like Cyprian had an opening some years ago, to move very heavily into the Western magical current in a way that he had not been,
Right.
and went, oh, there's a bunch of people thinking about me. I think I'll check those people out.
Right.
This seems now a very appropriate thing. And I go, I could see that. I could absolutely see that. So where previously I would have gone like, okay, this is just people's sex fantasies about Tom Hiddleston. I go, well, yeah, and
Right.
this is, if I believe that these things are real existent powers, which I do, not everything, but in general, I believe in these things as independent beings. I could totally see going like, hey, I'm getting attention I have never got.
Yeah.
And I'm waking up, and so I'm gonna like connect to those people. Totally reasonable to me.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, it does get sticky. I mean, as long as people aren't, for myself, if somebody's UPG that they're actively sharing is that, that a certain group has to be demonized or something like that, I'm straight out just saying bullshit. Like I'm not. It's.
I don't believe that the gods have much care about us as
We'd like to.
people. I don't really work with deity, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I work with deity as spirits, which is totally blasphemous to most of these folks. But
Right. Yeah.
So I'm kind of there with you. Like as soon as your God says we need to vilify these people, you're headed into the way of the cult again, and
Right.
Lao Tzu is saying no, don't do that.
Right. When deciding on an episode topic that we were going to tackle for this episode, because I threw about 3 options to you, and UPG was one of them. You went, I want to talk about UPG.
Not go for ancient fish gods, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, man, there's a lot we can talk about there. But you said your entire practice is UPG. So do you want to explain to folks what you mean by saying your entire practice is UPG?
I wrote that and figured that one was going to get thrown back at me. So at this point, and this isn't really where I started, I do what makes sense according to my personal gnosis.
Okay.
That is it's kind of the be all end all of what I'm doing. It's what I ask my allies for as well. Like, you tell me about this. You guide me through this. And when I don't do that, my life doesn't work very well. And so I would say that what I have is, rather than a theoretical basis, which I would say I don't really have a theoretical basis for what I do anymore. What I have is I have a history of experiential kind of reality that guides what I do. And so in that sense, it kind of ties into that. It's why I can't read much magical stuff anymore, because the majority of it kind of lacks that touch, which is what I'm looking for when I do read. So, like, for example, my favorite magical writer right now, and has been for some years, is Lee Morgan, who you had a fabulous, fabulous episode with. Everything that Lee says, I can feel the connection to my own experience. So I'm actually having like a Gnostic response to this, because Lee and I apparently practice a very different kind of magic.
Yeah.
And so I'm not looking to Lee for technique. I'm not looking for Lee to connect me to fairy.
Right.
Right? I'm not looking to Lee for validation about what I do. But when I read Lee's work, or when I listen to them talk, like, I can feel that we have a bond in what we are actually experiencing. And the allies do as well. Like, my allies love to listen to Lee talk.
Right.
Like, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts where I have an awareness of them being present. But like when we were doing that, when listening to your podcast with Lee in particular, they were totally present. Like, yeah, this is the part of the universe we're in, right? Is how I would say, rather than a tradition or a mythology or anything like that. So the allies guide me in what I do. And I run off of kind of intuition that is really experience that's been honed over a lot of time, is how I would define it. It's not, again, I didn't have this when I started. I was doing all sorts of crazy ass shit trying to figure out what was what. So they'll guide me, and they will happily fucking redirect me in the most brutal fashions if that's what needs to happen. And I have asked them to do this because I'm kind of dense. So it's like, no. If I'm going down the wrong road, fucking kick,
Right.
beat me until I understand what's going on. And they do. And so when I talk about my whole practice as UPG, what I really mean is that my lived experience at this point is really the be all and end all of my practice. I can't remember the last time that somebody kind of criticized something about my approaches where I cared.
Right.
Like, I hear it and I'll listen to see if there's anything there. But as far as just like, oh, you're doing it wrong because blah, 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 it's too witchy, or it's too loose, or it's too chaotic, or it's too structured, or whatever. It's like, you aren't in here. You don't know. And I'm super aware that what has gone down for me is not universally acceptable or applicable, is what I really wanted to say there. Which is why I kind of continuously talk about the fact that I'm not comfortable with, like, it's weird to be in a teaching role.
Yeah.
When you're really uncomfortable with the idea of being anybody's teacher.
100%. Yeah.
I'm fucking definitely nobody's guru. You couldn't pay me enough to fucking get me to tell you what to do. But I share because I think that some of what I've experienced and what I've learned might be useful for others on a similar trajectory, and because it also suits my peeps.
Right.
My peeps are very into the fact that you and I are having this conversation, and they're very into the fact that I like write books and that I have the Patreon community that I have. It serves something, I would say, greater, not in the sense of God on high, but larger than myself, you know? And so that's what I mean when I say that, is it's really, I would say that I'm not even vaguely tied into looking for traditional reasons to do anything the way that I do, or looking at systems for guidance in what I do anymore.
Right.
But again, I've been at this for 40 years.
Right.
So.
Yeah. To get there, though, Aidan, you said that you were trying things, right? You were experimenting with quite a bit, and when you read something like Six Ways, you realize that there's things in there that you've taken from other books, and you say it's not like you're hiding it. And I'm not. You literally are like, I got this from this person. Like, it's all right there. So the techniques are from elsewhere, but the experience and what you glean from them that goes in to feed your practice, that's what you consider UPG. Yes.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, so quite literally, like, so I know that, like, you know, retrospectively, I can go like, yeah, I was in a bookstore when that Montauk Chia book came out. I don't think I probably read the whole thing. Give me some Kenneth Grant. I want it weirder. But I know I began doing the microcosmic orbit, right?
Yeah.
I'm not recommending that because Montauk Chia is an authority and I'm trying to teach Taoist alchemy.
Right.
It's just something that has had consistently excellent results for me, and that actually kind of tunes my system in a way that makes magic work better.
Right.
It makes my life work better. So that it has a history, I'm going to credit the history everywhere I can, because I'm a big believer that we don't want to. We can get overly obsessed with cultural appropriation because, again, I think syncretism is the nature of our being on this planet as humans. You can be a dick about it, which is going, hey, how many people claim initiation into, we'll put this specifically on the white folks, but how many white folks claim initiation into ATRs?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but did you get to the level where you're actually allowed to teach this shit? Because they have rules about that.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
No, this is like the fact that you got whatever your first stages here, or you paid somebody to give you a certificate is not the same. That's cultural appropriation. I really try and steer as far away from that as possible because I think it's just bad practice beyond anything else. But we learn from everybody. It's like I learned a ton from chaos magic, so I'm always going to credit chaos magic. I don't consider myself at all to be a chaos magician, but that's my roots. That is what got me to go, okay, I'm going to take this up in my room and out in the forest, and I'm going to take it everywhere, and I'm going to figure out what the fuck works. And so, yeah, it's all rooted in I don't think I come up with anything, it's the things that have come to me that are perhaps original to my work. I either can see the roots of them and hopefully, give respect to, or I believe that they came from my allies. I don't think they came from me. I'm not that bright.
Right. And this is not a criticism that I'm leveling at you, Aidan, but some people could say Aidan throws a lot of words like my allies and my spirits and my experience. And some people could say, why believe anything that Aidan says? Aidan is practicing some kind of a spiritual solipsism where it's just that anything that's made sense to him, that he's like, he hasn't pulled from any tradition. He hasn't been guided through any kind of thing. So he has no authority. He's just sharing his opinions. Maybe he even just made it all up. And why is anybody listening to him? What would you say in response to something like that?
I think that that's a great starting point. I think it's awesome. I think that that's a fantastic place to begin with anybody.
Yeah.
But not necessarily for the reasons put forward. That idea of like ideological solipsism is suggesting that everything is essentially a projection of the individual mind.
Right.
And I totally don't agree with this. Mm-hmm. I actually agree with the idea. The version of that I would say is, and it's something I talk about in all the books, is that everything we experience is filtered through the individual mind, and you can't get away from that. Yeah. And that's kind of where this becomes really relevant. So it's correct. I am not an authority. I'm an authority on my own experience, and I hope that I am crystal clear about that in all of my writing. And it's partially why I kind of continuously, probably to the point that people that read this shit are like, fuck, he just did it again. That I'm like, this may not work for you this way. This may not be a great match because I don't know. The people that drive me crazy are the ones that go with the fucking certificates in the initiations or whatever, are saying, this is how it goes, and if it didn't work for you, you did it wrong. Yeah. I'm like, that's fucking asinine. I'm sorry. It's like, that's just like saying the best protein you can eat is shellfish, period. Yeah, except for the people that die. It's just, we have to have, and this is, I think, kind of, there have to be all these qualifiers in this stuff because it is personal experience. In the end, you're either studying other people's experience or you're studying your own. And it's not that these things have to be independent of one another. Like we said, I studied a lot early on. and I practiced a lot of different things. It wasn't really until fairly recently, in the short term of things, maybe 12 years ago, where my allies really showed up. And in part, it was because I got back into grimoire work.
Okay.
And they were like, no.
No.
Like, oh, well, who the fuck are you? And they're like, dude, fucking dense if you don't know who we are, because we have been around forever.
Yeah.
And I began going, okay, then guide me.
Mm, mm.
You know, and so instead, if we kind of view it as like again, I know I have kind of what I would say is like kind of cognitive biases. I have kind of faults in my thinking. I have tons of just personal proclivities about what I enjoy, what I'm willing to spend time in, what I am not. If we kind of take it from a Jungian approach, which I think is really critical to this stuff, particularly if you're kind of working this kind of systems, that there's tons of shadow aspects, buried programs that are all, and my current kind of focus is on trauma responses tied into this stuff, that are all gonna add filter to what we experience. And so how you experience Hecate, even if that being is singular, is gonna be different.
Right.
Because what's going on in the background for you is going to be different for me. And so how do we shift from it's all kind of mind and it's all my mind and I'm like the center of the universe in my mind, and therefore everything is just a projection from that. We go into knowing that we have this mass set of preconceptions, cognitive bias, what the Buddhists would talk about as view. We have lots of views. They're really hardcore about, like, you got to get past all your views if you want to get enlightened. This is kind of a different process than enlightenment, I think. Damien Eccles would disagree, but I think we're doing a different kind of magic. To me, the thing is going, hey, if I know I have all that running, and hopefully I know that I used to have more of it running, this suggests, this is where we can get very logical about it and a little scientific about it and go, there's probably more running that I don't know about. This is, I think, a pretty good guess, right? And this is kind of how we evade that getting trapped in that thing of thinking that we are just purely generating this reality, or we look at other people and go, well, that's all bullshit because it doesn't fit my model. You go, yeah, well, you got a model, but you have a model you probably don't know you have underlying that model. I know I do, and I'm constantly kind of excavating. This is kind of the game. Is like, because there's at a certain point, I think, at least for me, is if you know that you can do practical magic and have it work, there's a point where you go, okay, shit's pretty good then. What can we do to try and go in and fix the foundation?
Right.
Because I, like everybody else, had some structural damage at an early age that's still weakening the house, and that crack in the kitchen, getting bigger as it sinks on that corner. I don't know. So
I like that. I love the way that you make that analogy of just, the foundation. Sometimes the foundations and the models that we have, the models that we have are put on already established models. And if the one model is already working, go see where that model, what table is it on? Is the table, check the foundation for that. Love
if
it.
that book of matches is actually still doing,
Yeah, that's right.
Be a Rocky, or whether you might want to actually take the legs in somewhere and have them shortened.
Sure. Shared personal gnosis. I know you were part of groups in the past, magical groups, chaos magic groups, and things of that variety. Do you have any instances where you experienced something that was confirmed by another person that was also confirmed by another person, that kind of stuff? Did this occur?
It did. I had to think about this one. And there's 2 points, and one of them was, I don't know if we may have talked about one of these, if not both, in the spirits article, but one of them was about that spirit that lived on the corner in San Francisco.
Okay.
A friend of mine found it that I lived with, and it kind of showed me what it did when people were in its zone, and then we went and experimented being in its zone and went, yeah, it does that. Now, he showed it to me, and then I had that experience, and then we both did experiments with people who were more psychic than us, of bringing them into that space and seeing if they could stay there, and in general they couldn't. And we also had this experience at the People's Temple in San Francisco. Like, it became like the test of some new person would show up at the temple and be like, I am massively psychic, and we would take them and hang out in front of the Korean Lutheran Church, which was the former site of the People's Temple. And the people who were psychic were like, can we move? Like, almost immediately. Like, I don't want to stand here. I'm not going to stand here while you smoke a cigarette. And the people who weren't didn't. So you go like, okay, well, or at least it's different. They have a different kind of thing. But, it's like all that stuff. But the thing that actually sold me on that was I was talking about it on a podcast, and somebody that I knew back then, very vaguely, off to one side from San Francisco, said, yeah, I was back in San Francisco. And at that time, this was 25 years later. And that thing's still there. But so the neighborhood knew about it, right? But I wasn't aware of anybody, me and Mark, actually talking about it. So there's that event. And then there was an exorcism I did that I didn't think was going to be a real exorcism, because it was a bunch of junkies and speed freaks. And I got called over in the middle of the night, and if there was a thing in there, they were right. I was shocked, And I walked in, and it was like, oh, no, you can't be here, and came at me. And I was like, well, that's not cool. And so I drove it out of the house. And me and my girlfriend were there. And we hung out with those people just to make sure that they'd settled out and everybody was in agreement that it was gone. And when we got back to our house, it had shown up at our house.
Knock, knock. Hey.
And our roommates were also magicians, and one of them drove it out of our house. And this thing moved around the neighborhood. And most people had no reason to know about it. But because we were kind of the known magicians, people would show up like, there's a fucking bad spirit that showed up in our fucking house or our shop or whatever. Will you come check it out? And this happened. So it probably touched that I know of at least 10 or 15 people after I kicked it out of the house, out of the initial house. And so I look at that and go like, yeah, that's a shared experience, because these people didn't know that we did that. There was no reason. And then the last thing I would say is, and this is when I was part of the IoT temple that I was a part of in San Francisco back then, we did a lot of group rituals. And there's a way that it was kind of the first really clear communications I had from the peeps would happen in these rituals. That we would do these rituals, we'd get like a bunch of energy raised, and they would be like, oh good, he's got like the fucking blinders off, like he's pulled the button out of his ears, we're gonna fucking download. And so I would get these downloads from my allies where everybody else is like having their experience with Cthulhu or Dagon or whatever we were doing,
Hey,
fish guns. Future episode.
Right, there we go.
And, and so that was a really interesting one, because I decided not to tell anybody about this because I wanted to see if it was continuous. And it was, so that it was really peculiar to be in these ritual spaces where there was pretty good congruence of what was going on, what people thought happened in the ritual. And then there was my experience.
Right.
And it was also very weird to me, because some of the people that had the worst experiences within that, because we were doing elder god stuff a lot of the time, and it didn't go well for people, which is to be expected. Why anybody thinks that wouldn't go that way is weird to me, but that I was the one that people would come to and go, how do I clean this up? Because things have gone really south.
Right.
And I was like, is this also, I didn't think about this for years. I was like, now, did people recognize that I hadn't gotten that contagion or whatever? And so they figured like, oh, maybe he's got the antidote because he didn't get, where I was like, no, I had this totally different experience. Like, you guys like called up Cthulhu and my peeps gave me this download about I need to go out to X Park and leave an offering at this fucking stream. So weird because that was like almost the super like, yeah, I got to watch the group kind of UPG happen.
Right.
But I was very much outside of it.
We're outside. Very different life Aidan Wachter would have had the Elder Gods, had Dagon showed up and
Should
said,
have.
yeah. I'm not sure if this is a problem with me specifically, but I'm extremely skeptical of other people's experiences, and particularly when they share their experience. I'll give an example, and I really hope that you don't feel like I'm victimizing you in any way.
Totally victimized me. It's consensual.
So when you said earlier, we'll use an example that you used earlier. When you said that you were in the British Museum and you were looking at the Sigillum de Ameth that belonged to John Dee was there, which is this wax tablet that's got that one symbol that we all love. And then you said that you saw John Dee in the mirror. Immediately, this is how skeptical I am. It's probably a fault of my own. It's probably something I got to rectify. So this is where my brain goes immediately, Aidan, is that John Dee never owned that mirror. That mirror, he never saw that. Most likely 100% that mirror was something that was brought from Mexico to England. And then after, when Casaubon released John Dee's diary, this surge of interest occurred in John Dee in these magical mirrors. John Dee, he even has a diagram of the mirror that he used. It looks nothing like that mirror in the British Museum. So immediately I'm skeptical. When you say that, I'm like, bullshit, Aidan. You didn't see John Dee in a mirror that never belonged to John Dee. But like, this is just something that I do immediately. So I'm so skeptical about absolutely everything. But do you find this as well? Are you skeptical of people that share a lot of their UPG? And it happens so much, particularly when I find myself on Instagram or on Twitter, or X as it's called now, when people start, they're oversharing about their experiences. And a lot of times their experiences seem so far-fetched and of what they did and the demons that they talk to. And then you look at like, how are these people being paid? Oh, I see that they have a join my membership program and things like that. This is the pot calling the kettle black, right? Like yeah, both you and I are on Patreon.
Exactly. We both do this.
Right. So we're both, so this is the thing. But a lot of people will share like, the other day I conjured up an earthquake in San Francisco. That was my job because I did a goetic ritual. And it's just like, how do you navigate this? Because I'm finding it hard sometimes. I find it hard when people talk about stuff and I'm like, that seems like bullshit. Like it just seems so far-fetched. You're doing that because you just want people to think that you can do amazing stuff. And again, I really hope you don't think like I'm bullying you, Aaron, but it's like, because I personally know historically that John Dee never looked into that mirror. But that's not to say that because it's close to the Sigillum de Ameth that perhaps most likely you did have this experience. But my problem is just I'm so skeptical. I think people think that because I have a magical podcast that I believe absolutely everything. I am way more skeptical than people give me credit for. I think a lot of things don't require magic. I think that like there's no charm. Charms aren't going to make you like save your life. I think that most problems can be solved outside of a magical ritual and magical proteins. They just help a lot of the times. But yeah, this has been a lot, Aidan. So thank you for hanging in there. But what do you just do with this skepticism? Because I have it. It's a problem. And a lot of times when people talk about their experiences, I just go bullshit.
It kind of goes back to the Loki fucker thing.
Yeah.
I used to be I used to have the sense that I needed to have an opinion.
Right.
And I really am working on not having as many opinions.
Yeah.
I already have, at least the one asshole. Uh, managing more is really not in the cards, hopefully. But, uh, I am skeptical, and it's really what led me to chaos magic.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm a different kind of skeptical than maybe a lot of people have, which is I'd had a ton of really intense intrusions, whether these as demonic intrusions or as connections to other worlds, to my allies, to the Man in Black. I'd had all these things well before I started into magic. And so where I was skeptical when I came into magic, and where I still remain skeptical, is I end up not knowing, and this is a constant thing. It's something I've been thinking about a lot as I'm in another book or two right now. I guess the way that I would put it is I don't believe that magic is a unified thing.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's things that people do with magic that I find incredibly peculiar. And so if I had a skepticism about it, it would be less on their experience, but more on, if you are this good at it, if we're going to this kind of specific, let's talk about magical influencers, which we are in some sense, but hopefully not in the really negative sense of that. Terrible word.
Isn't it?
But it's functionally correct. I end up going, if you are this wired in, why are you kind of hunting validation on Instagram? Why are you? So I guess I would be way more comfortable with those people throwing that out there. Like there's people that I know that I think have had pretty severe mental issues that have brought things up to my attention that I'm more likely to take seriously. Because there's no reason for them to tell me that. There's not a benefit for them, you know? So my skepticism is kind of about drive a lot more than the experience. I do think people have there's always been an issue in the modern world of kind of what I say is kind of the Hollywood impression of how magic works, infiltrating into actual practice and into people's expectations.
Right.
And we've talked about this, I think, before, maybe not. I know I've talked about it to lots of other people, is we're also in an extremely visual culture. And so there's a way that those who can describe their experiences in these hyper-visual ways often get way more credibility than those who don't, because it's kind of accepted that this is how information is passed, I really dig when people share their UPG with me, but I generally have no comment on it. And often people are coming because they're looking for that for me, because it's kind of like, okay, he's been at this for a while, maybe he can explain this. And usually I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. Or, wow, that's really intense. And sometimes it's like, have you told that spirit you don't want anything to do with it? Because that sounds really nasty. you know? So that comes up. And so I'm kind of like, again, I'm kind of in this borderline state now where knowing everybody's got their filters, and a lot of people don't really know that they have their filters. It's like if everybody's wearing sunglasses, like cleaning your sunglasses, you'll see better than if they're all smudged.
Right.
But you're still seeing everything very filtered.
Yeah.
And to me, kind of one of the really important aspects about any kind of practice like this is that you're always in the process of trying to remove as many of those filters as you can. So the first filter that I think we have to kind of go at, and I didn't go after this first at all, but it's like if I got to offer something, it's like if you weren't the center of all of this, what would these things mean to you? Because I think that then can put you in other people's shoes when you're talking. But it also goes like, okay, if you think you're causing earthquakes, and you really think that, do you want to share that with anybody?
That's where the thing occurs, is the sharing of it.
It's like I had a roommate and she's a lovely person. I do not know if she's still alive. This is so far ago that I feel okay saying about it, talking about it, and it's incredibly unlikely she would ever hear it. But who basically went off her meds. She had a lot of psychiatric issues. Wonderful, wonderful person who I fucking loved dearly. And started talking to our roommates about what was up, and none of them could cope at all. And one of them finally was like, go talk to Aidan, because Aidan might be able to have this conversation with you. And I had a couple of really good conversations with her going like, can we kind of take this apart? And I'm not saying that your experience is wrong, because I don't know. But we know that you have been doing really well when you were on your meds and that you went off. And now these things have come up. Are you sure that these things aren't related? I wasn't trying to get this person institutionalized.
Right.
I had no problem with the fact that they had mental health problems. This is fine with me. Most people do. It's not unusual. But it's kind of that same situation where I was kind of like, until you get this stuff sorted, you probably gotta watch who you're talking about this stuff with.
Right.
And let's get you back on your meds, or get you into your therapist and see what they think, or get you into your psychologist and see what they think, before you go kind of spewing some really random shit out in the world, because it's going to do you harm. I don't know how related those things are, but to me it's kind of that, like, I'm happy to share about stuff that happened a long time ago.
Right.
But I'm also not generally sharing about what impact it had on me. And I'm often not sharing the details of it unless I have a very good reason to. And usually when I've done that, it's not because I want you or anyone else to believe me.
Right.
It's because I think it's important for people who are on the path to see some different options about how these things can go down. And so it's again like, yeah, what's your reason for sharing it? Do you have one? And is whatever you have learned from it actually for you? Or is it for you and everybody else? Like, this is different. If you're in a coven and you are deeply connected, it makes absolute sense if one of the spirits or deities in that coven comes in and gives you some kind of messaging to share with that coven.
Right.
Then I'm going to go spew this everywhere. Like when I was writing Weaving Fate, I was in trance, and one of the things that came up in that trance was that the brothers were like, share the Fever Stone practice. And I checked that like 3 times with them in different trances. Like, you really want this out there? And they were like, yeah. And I said, because I'm putting this on you. This is your practice. I've had good effects with it, but I'm not gonna credit this thing. I did not come up with that practice in my experience. That came from elsewhere, And so so I guess I have that thing that, yes, I'm skeptical, but usually it's more about motivation. It's not that I necessarily care.
Right. Yeah.
Have these things that seem outlandish to me. It's like, Again, I'm totally non-visual, so I'm sure that if Jason Miller and I sat down and had like, let's talk about your wildest experience, because he's straight up been clear, like he can see everything.
Right.
Whatever comes out of his mouth, I'm going to be like, right, seriously, dude, because I had no experience of it.
Right. Yeah.
Trust him. I go, okay, Jason's kind of the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
Jason, I believe I can see his stuff is working. And the stuff that I've played with of his stuff works. It's not generally how I work, but I think it's very valid. I just always try and remain aware that most spiritual magical experiences that other people have may have no bearing on mine, and mine may have no bearing on them.
Yeah.
And so it's there's absolutely stuff that I hear that is like I go like, wow, that's really whack, but usually because there's so much ego in it, and that's usually a pretty clear giveaway that somebody's not there, or you see somebody who's just an absolute train wreck.
Yeah.
You go like, you're teaching about how to not be a train wreck, and you're really clearly a train wreck. Like, I don't think you know what's what.
Yeah. I'm sure, and I don't want people to think that Aidan and I exist on some kind of a pedestal, but I'm sure you're like me, Aidan. Like I haven't shared my craziest experiences. Like that's something that's so personal to me. And the reason I'm not sharing is because if you sign up to my Patreon a little bit further on down the line, I'm going to share this with you. I'm not. And I actually feel bad when I share some of I recently did an episode where I talked about one of my evocations from a grimoire. And I kind of felt dirty doing it because the experience was so personal to me. And that's not the reason my content in quotes or my offerings exist. It's not what I'm sharing. I always try to steer people's attention to the how and the why of why I'm doing the rituals, how one goes about doing the rituals, as opposed to the whatness of the results and things of that variety. And for people that are making really wild claims, you always have to ask, like, to what purpose does it serve? Like, how is it them sharing this experience serve them? And a lot of times you'll find out it's monetary. A lot of times it's finding out trying to get a lot of people to sign up to their accounts. But again, it's tough for me to throw rocks in this glass house because I've done that. I've shared these experiences in hopes that, the people that pay me money every month, they find it interesting. I'm not a victim in the sense that I say, like, ew, it hurts me when I have to share my wild, crazy experiences. The ones that I have shared are very minimal compared to the other extraordinary experiences that I have that I do not want to share whatsoever.
And I have, this is a process that I've had to go through quite a lot with kind of my both how I feel about it for myself, how I feel about it, and how the peeps feel about it. Because that is not a relationship that I can share.
Right.
I can share that it exists, and I can share that it is the most important relationships that I have in my life. I don't actually believe it's special. I don't believe it makes me special. But kind of when I started writing and started being more out in what I do in the Patreon is in part to be like really open that all of these practices I think work, but they don't work the same for everybody. Different things work better for other people. Some stuff is just like a big fucking no. There's people that write to me going, hey, I did this piece that's in your book and it came out like this, and I tried it a couple times and it was bad. And I'm like, stop.
Don't do it.
Like,
doctor, it hurts when I do this. Stop.
Trust that. It's like, even if it's my favorite thing doesn't mean it's okay for you to play in. And but what I do think is important, I think what you do is important. I think all of the folks that are out who are kind of honestly sharing regardless of whether there's on some level that it becomes monetized or not, to me is to show variety of this kind of experience, because it got shut down in kind of the West. It became so much something that required the intermediaries of a priesthood. This is my view, because I'm not in a religion. I'm not in a religion that has a priesthood. I'm not in any of them. But and so it's very helpful, I think, for people to be able to look around and go like, whoa, that Aidan guy kind of sounds like a nut job, but I like what Doug's saying there, and it makes sense to me. Maybe I will check out what Doug's talking about, right? Or maybe because we talked about Lee, they'll talk about Lee, and that will be this mind blower for them, and think, oh, fuck, this is so much my experience. Or it speaks to me so much. Or like I talked to you about Christina Oakley Harrington. I was like, oh my God, I would have been a totally happy Gardnerian witch if I'd been in England, probably. Jeez.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Shit about those people forever. But, and so that's to me the value of the sharing, is that I think we're trying to find a way forward in a very materialist world,
right,
that includes magic, which you and continuously will state till the end of my days, I think is like a birthright of humans. It's part of us. It's in every culture. It's everywhere. And it got put aside in my mind because it wasn't politically and commercially valuable to the kind of industrial capitalist state.
Right.
So I think we're trying to find all of these things that can help us live well. And to me, this is a very big part of that. And so a lot of it is is all that's being put out is a sales pitch? Is this an MLM?
Right.
Is this like, I can't give you a certification in anything. I can't, there's a couple of us, there's a friend of mine that like fucking flipped me out. I was so upset. It was hilarious. Because she wrote me and said, and now I'm talking about it just to get it out there. I've talked a couple places that she wrote. She goes, so do you think that like in like 40 years there's going to be like a Wikipedia entry on Wachtarianism?
Oh God.
And I was like, oh fuck no. It's like, and so it's like we joke about it now publicly, because it's like such a like, no, that's not at all the intention here. It's like, I don't know what's right for you. I do not know. And I can't imagine a scenario where I would know. And so to bring it back to like be really clear about this, so the UPG is you have to figure that out. You have to have this personal experiential process go on. And the gnosis is what you carry out of that. And it quite possibly will be meaningless to anybody else. And you should kind of expect people to go like, kind of nutty when you talk about it.
Yeah.
'Cause it is. It's personal. It's like anything else. I could talk to you about, why do I think Videodrome is the funniest movie I ever saw? Like, it's a terrible film. I mean, come on. It's a nasty, nasty piece of work, Or why do I think that Crash by Cronenberg is fucking hilarious? Again, most people would watch those and go, this is kind of disturbing. And I just laugh and laugh and laugh. What's wrong with me? I don't know.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that experience is wrong for me. For sure. I would be a fool to think that I could just tell somebody on the street, what's your favorite really funny movie? It's like, check out Crash by Cronenberg. Like, right. I wouldn't do that to someone.
No. Yeah. Yeah. I have to ask you, this is the final question before we talk about what's new in the world of Wachter, but how should one do as you do, Aidan? And you seem to have done so well. Again, to go back to how I introduced you, people do ask me constantly, like, who do I need to follow? And the list starts with you, Aidan. It really does. I just say, Aidan has, besides not just being a really great person and a fantastic writer, this is the way to approach magic practically now. So how do you tell people to best integrate UPG into their beliefs, into their practice, and how best to, take on other people's UPG as they tell it. What's the best way? That's such a broad question, but and I don't expect this answer to be, a prescription, but how is the best way of interacting UPG and other people's UPG into what they do? Because you write your books. Weaving Fate is an entire book of UPG, shared UPG. So how's the best way of getting people so that they can come up with something like Weaving Fate on their own? Like, how do they get there? How do people get to that point?
You know, um, and I know I quoted it in probably in that book, but I really love that saying that says that you should try to be open-minded, but not so much that your brains fall out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like step one. Step two, and this is both for other people's, but it's especially for your own. Like at the point that if you get to the point, and not everybody will, and that's not a problem, I don't think, where you start getting what I just call the calms from the peeps, right? You're starting to get information from some source that appears to not be you consistently. That, and this can be other people too, yeah, other human people, but listen, even if it seems weird or odd, and be open that this, if you're talking about somebody else, that this experience could be very real for them, and it just may have nothing to do with you.
Right.
And so there's no logical reason why it would make sense to you. It's kind of like I'm a huge fan of a lot of Japanese rock, uh, and like one of the things that I learned to do is like when I listen to this the first time, I don't want to know what the lyrics are.
Right. Yeah. It's like we
And
have
then
krautrock. I was like, I don't care what they're saying.
and then I usually, because I really like video, I grew up on MTV back when it was video, and I love videos. So then I'll go and watch videos, and the second time I watch the video, I'll put on the closed captions, and it's awesome because it's not, it's not right,
Right. Yeah.
but it's trying. It's trying to tell you the general gist of the song,
Right. Right.
and so you realize like it's also not necessarily going to be crystal clear. Like there's stuff that I got that I absolutely thought I understood, that down the road I went like, oh, I totally got that wrong. This is what that message was.
Right.
But here's the thing. If I had gotten the message the way I now interpret it, would I have done the things that I did that got me to where I could hear it correctly? Right? So you got to listen, and you got to be open-minded, and you got to be like, this could be really strange. I could be getting really peculiar suggestions. If they're not dangerous or they're not coercive of other people, check it out. See what happens.
Yeah.
If they're suggesting go eat that plant, you should probably like look that up first, because
Yeah.
they have different ideas of what's important. Realize that you can remain kind of attentive but non-committed, both to your own and other people's experiences. Like you don't like, I don't think that shit that you see on social media you need to pay any attention to at all.
Yeah.
Like in general, unless if you don't know the people, like I know you to some degree, we've had interactions now forever, but we've never been in the same room, but like I share, if I have dreams about other magicians, I email them and go, no idea if this will make any fucking sense to you, but I had this dream.
Yeah.
Because it seems reasonably to me that we could be getting information for each other,
Yeah.
But I don't have to have an opinion about that. I don't have to assume that the dream that I had that's tied to you or tied to Dara or tied to Lee is for you. I don't have to think that it is for me. I don't have to think that it's anything. I can just kind of go, okay, we're all doing some peculiar shit. So I could be a conduit here to actually pass something on. So there's that piece of it. Realizing that we're like in this world of speed and short attention spans, and that these things come together in a way that is not very conducive to a spiritual world, in a spiritual practice. So we think we need to understand it now. We think we need to respond now. We think this should happen. It ties into that thing. It's like, can I be present and let whatever is coming in from another person or another spirit, can I let it be present and see in time if it makes sense? Because there's times that people have said, hey, I had this dream about you. This is what was going on. And I'm like, thanks.
Thanks. Yeah. Cheers.
And in my mind, I'm like, okay, meaningless. And then 6 months down the road, I'm like, that was actually there was something in there that's interesting, you know? And so is there something to learn from it? And then the last thing is realizing that, particularly due to the social mediaization of the world, we have this idea that I learned about through feminists and people of color that I knew, which is this idea of centering yourself in conversations that aren't yours, just to be centered in. And this is a really important thing about this stuff too, is realizing like, okay, like one of the things that I had to realize is that I get shown stuff that I don't think has anything to do with me. This happens in trance for me semi-regularly, where it's like I've been this is going to sound really weird and I don't really want it to, but it's gonna. I've had the sense that some of the things that I've been shown in trance were simply things that, for whatever reason, the things that I was dealing with in that space wanted me to witness. Period. Right. Now, maybe those things are having an effect on me in the background, but I can kind of sense it now. I'm kind of like, that's odd, or that's interesting, or what was that? And they're pretty clear, like, don't worry about it. It's like, okay. Not everything is for us. Not everything is about us. If you are really tied into either, I would imagine this is very true for my polytheistic friends, who I tend to actually get along with better than many others, even though I'm such a non-theist. I just view that they have a different language about their spirits. Like, it's not necessarily like the allies, I think, ask me to do stuff that's not about me, that it serves them in some way. And sometimes they've just said that. Like, if I've said, like, I don't get what this is for, and they're like, you don't need to get what this is for.
Right.
Okay, we've been fucking doing this for a long time, so I have great trust there. But that's a long established trust, and it's because I sat and listened and realized that sometimes I'm not going to know at the speed or with the kind of clarity that I want to. A lot of the times this stuff is coming through, and it's kind of what we were saying before. It's like building a foundation, like stone by stone, when I don't even realize that there's a foundation that needs to be built.
Yeah.
And so if I can just be patient and go, okay, that happened. Don't really know what that was. That happened. Don't really know what that was. But over the years, you realize, like, wait a second, kind of sticking with that metaphor of building, like, there's a room in my house that didn't used to exist. Yeah. And I think if we're dealing with it, taking this stuff seriously, which I very much do, that's almost the goal. Is it's like, let's build the best house we can for me, for my allies, for the peeps, for the people that are in my world, for the people that are in the world. Because I believe that this is and this is where I probably diverge from a lot of people who practice. I believe that kind of the magical resurgence is a process of, in part, healing the Western human world. I think that we lost something that was very, very crucial to our well-being, and have kind of, I talk about this, I think, in the bio on my site, though that needs to be, everything else on the site needs to be updated, that I view this kind of like loss of a clear connection to the other worlds, to the others. I think it leads to a kind of pathology in humans, because then we become the center of everything.
Yeah.
That's not a healthy place to be. Yeah.
I do agree with you. I think that magic is while I wouldn't use the term because it's a very concrete term that, but the corrective, it's part of the process. I see a manifestation of people's interest in magic these days is part of this thing that has been cleaved out of Western existence, and I see the interest and how people are directing themselves that way in far greater numbers and with a more prolonged interest. Because a lot of people that get interested in it, they'll go 2 years and then back to cubicle job and Netflix. When there's nothing wrong with those things, but
far too much time in both of them, and
yeah. Yeah. But I think you're right. I think that this is a very human thing that we've we're getting back to doing because it needs to be done. And there's probably a way better way. And you're much more eloquent than I am, Aidan, as far as saying this. But I think it's very true. The UPG is one of those things that every person who does ritual magic needs to realize that your experience is not always the experience of other people. It is a very important aspect, particularly for the more individualized based practices of magic. If you're using magic to help you in your life, you need to understand the role that your unverified personal gnosis plays in that. So thank you so much for joining me, Aidan. We got to ask you what's new in your world. What's happening? You just got back from a bike trip. There's so much going on, and we'll talk about your Patreon in a sec. But what's happening, man? It's been a few years.
Years, other things that I share, because I mean, this is a funny one that I shared because it ties into our whole conversation. Like, I had a massive breakdown. There was a big chunk of my life that I discovered I had kind of ceased living in a way that made sense, and it kind of drove me crazy. Not in a clinical way, probably, but maybe, I don't know. That's probably arguable forever. But and that's why I bailed out from the online world, was like, I'm not going to do anything that's of any service to anybody while I'm this far out. So let's just go away. And I didn't know if I'd come back, but I did. The allies helped my ass out. And things have been great. So I did a really insanely challenging 1,200 miles in the high mountains on a bicycle. And kicked my ass well and good, and had some amazing experiences. And I'm just kind of getting back into writing, getting back into playing music.
Nice.
Bought a really sweet baritone electric guitar, which is just bad as fuck.
The people listening obviously can't see it, but I can see it. And is that the one? It's right behind you there.
Yeah, it's super fucking cool. It's like, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with it, but it's making me very happy in a way no guitar has in a long time. So it's like, okay, you're a good monster. We'll see what we're gonna come up. And just kind of trying to figure out what the books are. How I kind of know what the next two books are, but I have not found kind of the current of those books, because the book process for me is very much about. It's kind of that ship and process thing again. It's like, I got to find out what that thing wants to be. Right. If I was not, again, if UPG wasn't how I rolled, it would be much easier, because I know what the subjects are, and I could just do a ton of research and put that all together and release it. But that's not really how my books work. So I got to wait and keep kind of trying to lure it into my rocks and go, come on, pretty book.
Right.
You come crash on these rocks for a while and hang out with me.
Yeah, because you wrote 6 Ways, Weaving Fate, and Changeling fairly quickly. Like, this was in a space of a couple of years, and now people are wondering, like, Aidan, when's the next book? Get us this next thing. And
I think probably I'll have one done in the first quarter of next year.
Oh wow.
Sooner. But I think one of them is on the verge of telling me what it is, and then I tend to write like a possessed person. I tend to write for 12 or 14 hours a day for
Wow.
a couple of months, and then it goes into a very massive revision process. So that I can kind of feel it coming on, but I think that'll probably come on after the equinox.
Nice. Great. We mentioned a bit earlier that both you and I are on Patreon, but I want people to know Aidan's Patreon. As soon as I heard that Aidan was on Patreon, I had to get on here, and Aidan does these. If you won't mind, I'll share with the folks what Aidan gets up to there. Aidan does about every day, 2 days, he uploads it with a video. It's of just the right length usually, because sometimes you can be like me and give. I just released an hour and a little half long episode, too much for a lot of people. But Aidan puts up videos there where he's talking about a variety of things. A lot of them to do with not just what's going on in the world. In fact, very few videos are about what's currently happening. A lot of times you're just talking about your experiences and opinions on certain things, and just how this kind of magic was influential to you. It's these wonderful chunks of wisdom and experience, and UPG. It's in there as well, but it's delivered in that Wachter-esque way that only you can do, and I think it's just fantastic. And it seems like you've got a very lively community as well, and people just love interacting with you, and I think it's fantastic. So tell us more about what made you want to do the Patreon, and what folks can get if they join up, and all of it.
I left social media, and that was awesome. And then I realized that I actually, once I kind of got my brain back in order, that I didn't want to be completely. I'm a super reclusive person in a way that people probably actually don't believe the degree that it's true, because it really is very, very true. And I realized I did want to have contact, and Instagram didn't really mess with me. So I was like, okay, I could start on the Instagram, but all I want to do on Instagram is take pictures of the mushrooms and shit.
Yeah.
That's pretty much my social media presence, is that. And the Patreon came up because I used to have a Facebook group that was very good, but and this is like, straight up, some people are not happy about it, but I actually kind of went to Patreon because I wanted everybody that was in there to have a buy-in.
Right. Yeah.
Literally, there's like a literal buy-in here, because I thought it would do what it actually has done. And you may well have seen this as well, that it produces such a cleaner space. Because if you're out in the magical world as any kind of person that has any kind of, I would say that this changed radically when I started publishing. Book people have it, podcast people have it. Kind of everybody can come out of the woodwork going, either this experience is going on or teach me this. And it's like, okay, there's books out there that cover a ton of this stuff. There's really not anything that needs to, but I wanted a place to have a community and a place where I could go deeper. And so really the Patreon has mostly been, I don't know, it's like 75 videos or something at this point. And it's almost all question and answer, where people there in the Discord server that's connected are saying, you wrote this and this part of it made sense, but this didn't, or I'm not getting it, or I'm having this kind of glitch, or what do you think about grimoire magic?
Right.
You did some of it, but you don't like it. Can we talk about that? It's like, yeah, sure, we can talk about that. And then I'm kind of expanding a little bit from there. I think the next thing is gonna probably be like a 4 or 5 part energy working that I use pretty regularly and have for a long time. Because sometimes it's really hard to get that stuff out of books.
Right.
I've had some requests for some of the trance induction stuff that I use. Can I produce audio files of that? And that will be going into the Patreon as well. And then along with that, there's a very active Discord from people who are kind of interested in kind of my approaches. Not everybody's working with my stuff, I don't think, but people are all very, very cool. It's a very, I would say, pretty relaxed place. A few people have started showing up that have got kind of specialties in particular things. And we're making space for them where I'll be facilitating a Zoom for one of those people to kind of teach something that they do.
Cool.
that I think is interesting to people. So the goal is just to have a more controlled, quieter, respectful space for people to hang out that are interested in kind of what I do and things that are kind of related, not necessarily strictly that.
Definitely.
And that I can can't force, but I can suggest they listen to Maximum the Hormone videos with me. But Tommy Kelly, nobody does, I don't think. So
Yeah, I think I think Aidan's Patreon is a delightful Patreon, and if you've read any of Aidan's work and you enjoy it, you have to sign up to Aidan's Patreon. It's well worth every cent. There's a few tiers, 3 tiers.
there's like a dozen tiers, but
Are there? Oh, okay. Yeah.
if you want to give me more money, I created tiers for that.
Right. Okay.
But, and then that will probably change later, maybe when the books are done, maybe before. But there has been a lot of requests for more teaching. I did teach a course at the beginning of right before the pandemic, and some folks have asked if I would bring that back, and I will probably do something like that as a higher tier.
Okay.
That is really like a focused, let's work through some stuff, so that people can check it out with some kind of backup there, because it's really hard to, again, kind of give people guidance unless you kind of know pretty precisely what they're doing. Even then it's kind of hit or miss, but it's like if you got 15, 20 people who are all working on the same thing, it's more likely somebody in there is going to go like, oh yeah, this is glitchy for me too, but I've figured out a way to make it work. Because again, I don't think that my methods are going to work as suggested for everybody. I've never seen that to be true.
Fantastic. Yeah, everybody drop what you're doing. If you like Aidan's work and you didn't know that Aidan has a Patreon, he's got a Patreon. There'll be links in the show notes. Please head there and check them out. What's the next couple of years looking like for you, Aidan? Do you have any ideas? It's just more writing, more of the same, a trip every once in a while, a world tour. What's happening?
I don't really know. I kind of have it in my head that once the next book comes out, I'm going to load all my camping gear in my car and drive around the U.S. and kind of hook up with folks that I've met through this magical world. Again, I really cannot imagine trying to teach live, but I would at least like to attend to some festivals.
Okay.
Don't know if I would want to be a presenter.
Right.
But I'm not a fan of a lot of people in a room anyway.
Yeah.
Where kind of neuro-spicy, as Laura Tempest Zakroff calls it, shows up in unpleasant ways. So I'm not even sure I can do that, but I'm pretty sure I can't do that on stage unless it's dark and I'm playing a guitar. So yeah, that was okay. I was all right with that aspect of it, but I'm not sure I want to do that either.
Right.
So
For sure.
maybe in some years there will be the incredibly spaced out Aidan Wachter guitar tour. I don't know.
That would be awesome. I would definitely look forward to that. I'd come down. I
don't know if it would be awesome. No, I'm not that good.
It'd be awesome. It'd be too bad. Doug's decided it's already going to be awesome. I shall have links to all of the places to find Aidan on the World Wide Web, as well as a few, not a ton, because we're talking about an idea here. Again, we were chastised for talking too much about the history and the more concrete, objective aspects of magic and the occult, so we had to cover an idea on this one. So the show notes, they're going to be somewhat small, but there'll still be some stuff to click around. I don't know, Kenneth Grant's in there, and H.P. Lovecraft. I got a couple of cool H.P. Lovecraft links. If you're unfamiliar with Lovecraft, and even if you are, check out these links. I think they're pretty good. Anyhow, those and all of the links for Aidan will be available at whatmagicisthis.com. Please head there. Do you like what I'm doing here at What Magic Is This? And do you think that you'd like to show your support in some way, shape, or form? Well, now you can, and there's 3 ways of doing that. As we do with every episode, let's go through them, and who knows, somewhere along the way I might say something silly or funny, and that's the reason that you're not skipping over this little outro thing that I do each and every episode. Here we go. The first way of supporting my show is indeed the best way, and it's what Aidan and I were talking about earlier. That would be Patreon. Patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com and click on any number of the, well, there's a lot of them. the support me on Patreon little link buttons there. You can't go anywhere on my website without tripping over one of those. And please, if you click those, it'll go straight to my Patreon page. My Patreon is basically a totally different show. It's, in my opinion, the best stuff that I do is on the Patreon. And it's I'm not saying it's a shame that, I only have my Patreon supporters to listen to that, but I will say everything that I do here on this main podcast, it's fun, it's great, I love it, but I really enjoy doing my stuff on Patreon. I do episodes about saints, about angels, about different deities. I did one about that Hermanubis. Remember when I was talking earlier about the dog-headed folks and the dog-headed saints? Well, I did an episode about Hermanubis. That's on there. I just finished an episode and released an episode. It's about an hour and a half long about the Scottish witch persecutions, the tortures, and the burning of them once they had been killed, and all of the myths and some of the personal introspections and insights that I glean from this incredible near 400-year period of history. An hour and a half long. That's basically a whole episode, and that's what the Patreon has. It has full-length episodes. I spend as much time, if not more. At this point, I'm actually spending more time on my Patreon than I am on this main podcast. And so I would love to see you support my work there because what I do here on the more public side of What Magic Is This is great, but really the best stuff is over on Patreon. It's only $7 American a month. That's, I don't know, a pack of coasters for drinks when if you have some really nice wooden furniture and not that like IKEA stuff. Because I don't know about you, when I have IKEA furniture, I don't use drink coasters because that shit's like it's, I don't know, like $10, and drink coasters are like $20. So why? I'm not paying $20. I've just completely screwed myself up because I basically said that drink coasters are $7, then I just said they're 20. Anyhow, I hope you understand what I'm saying. It's like, if you have IKEA furniture, you don't worry about drink coasters. Um, anyhow, my Patreon. See, that was supposed to be the funny thing that I was going to say in this outro, and it just turned into something really dumb. You're welcome, everyone. Anyhow, it's only $7 American a month. That's very little money. You can buy a drink for $7. If you go to like a hipster burger bar and order, something on tap, most likely it's going to be an IPA that tastes like piss. And the other thing is that they're going to charge you $7 for it. So why not drink? Why not drink that piss India Pale Ale from that shitty hipster burger joint, and instead support me, Douglas Batchelor, in producing these fine, wonderful, highly researched, fun, funny episodes of this podcast that you adore. Because I know a lot of you are still just, you're just listening, and you like the listening. I get it. You've probably been listening for many years, and you're just like, nah, the Patreon. Nah, I don't feel like it. I don't like giving my credit card and paying every month kind of stuff. It's not my thing. This is my job. This is what I do. I wake up in the morning, and you can ask anybody that knows me or spends time around me. I get to work immediately, and I do this sometimes 60, 70 hours a week. So uh, I am being paid hourly, probably pitifully right now, below minimum wage for how many hours I work. But at least I'm my own boss, who can sometimes be an asshole. Anyhow, this has gone really way too long. All I'm trying to say, my Patreon is the best. It's the greatest. It's only $7 a month. I would love to see you there. It gives you access to a Discord community. Everybody in the Discord is so lovely. They're great. I put out videos on my Patreon. It's the best. It's only $7. Everybody else is raising their prices. Mine's $7. I just want you to join. I just want you to support me. And I want the numbers for that because I want to keep doing this as a job. And yeah, that's it. All right. So patreon.com/what magic is this. If you don't like the paying every month kind of stuff, but you still want to maybe send me a chunk of change in some way, shape, or form, PayPal. Go to whatmagicisthis.com, click on any number of the PayPal links there. They're all over the place. They're just scattered as much as the Patreon links there. Click it, $5, $10, $20. You can enter in any sum. I hope, it's in at least the dollars category. That would be nice. But if you got only 50 cents, you're like, Doug, here's 50 cents. I'd be like, cool. Thanks. I'll buy some gum. Just one piece. One piece of Wrigley's Juicy Fruit gum. That's the classic, though. Or the Wrigley's Spearmint. I haven't had one of those in ages. You know what? I'm gonna go after I'm done recording this. I might go and get myself some gum. Nah, I'm not gonna do that. I'm over 40. Getting me out of the house now requires at least spending $40. I got to spend at least $40 to leave the house. I don't know what. Okay. I should really work on my routine a little bit. Anyhow, PayPal, that is basically just covering all my costs for this podcast. I say it every show. It's not cheap running a podcast. Everything is on is on like a monthly payment plan as well, just like my Patreon, and so I have to pay every month to use my editing software and all of the stuff, and that gets expensive. So I'm in the hole about $200 every month just to keep this podcast running. And yeah, so if you donate through PayPal, that just goes right back into doing that. I have only had about 4 months where enough people have donated through PayPal where I've been able to pay for my costs, and I get it. It's a lot of people ask for money these days, but yeah, if you throw some change to me over the PayPal, we can give some nice kibble to the hamster that runs on the wheel that keeps this show above water. I'm mixing up my metaphors here, but just go with it anyhow. PayPal, another way of supporting my show. The last way of supporting What Magic Is This and my work is through merchandise. Merchandise, right? So if you go to whatmagicisthis.com, click on the menu button there, go to the merchandise, t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, stickers, fridge magnets, tote bags, wall hangings. What else am I missing? iPhone cases, laptop bags. Unfortunately, the notebooks are gone, and the notebooks were the best. That's really a shame, but the notebooks were great. I've got a few. I'm saving. I'm hoarding them now. Anyhow, um, if you want to buy a T-shirt or anything like that, you want to show your love of what magic is this. Grab some merchandise. I literally got paid out earlier, and it was like $8 for a month's worth of merchandising stuff. So I don't get paid very much, but I love seeing people wearing my stuff. If you do grab some of my merchandise, like a coffee mug, and you take a sip from it, please take a picture, send it to me. I'll put it up on the Instagram or something like that, with your permission, of course. But the merchandise, I don't see a ton of money from it, but I love seeing people wearing it. It's just nutty to me that uh, somebody wears my stuff. That's incredible. I'm, of course, my best customer. I walk around. The other day, I had a What Magic Is This water bottle, and I left it somewhere. And then somebody came up to me because I was wearing a What Magic Is This shirt. And they were like, "Oh, I assume this water bottle's yours because it matches your shirt." And I was like, "Hey, yeah, it is. Bingo." And then I was like stared at them because I was waiting for them to ask me what magic is this? And so there's this really awkward, like 3, 4, 5 second pause. And then they just like turned around and walked away. I was like, damn it. Oh, I really wanted to tell them about the show. I'll get them next time. Bastard. No, just kidding. He gave me my water bottle back. It was amazing. Anyways, uh, where am I? Yeah, merchandise. Grab some merchandise. It'd be greatly appreciated. This outro is maybe one of my longest ones. Anyhow, I would love to see your support at one of these ways, but the best way, of course, is the Patreon. Keeps myself alive, keeps Aidan alive, and it's fun to boot. Both of our Patreons. I'm not just saying this because that Aidan and I are in like cahoots. We're sharing money. Anyhow, we're not. But both of our Patreons are kick ass. They're so good. And yeah, if you support either myself or Aidan, you're getting your money's worth. 100%. All right, there's my pitch. All of these things are available at the website. That's whatmagicisthis.com. We'll see you over there. All right. Would love to see your support though as well. Come on over. I've got about 380 or so people supporting me on Patreon. I'd love to see more. So come on down. everybody, if you don't know about Aidan's work, and I'm highly doubting at this point that you listen to my podcast and you don't, you have to find it. Besides just being a wonderful writer and a very eloquent presenter on his Patreon, Aidan is also an incredibly kind person. I'm going to share a little story here with people. A few years ago, Aidan was ceasing making silver crafts and things. He was moving into the world of writing full time, and so Aidan, out of nowhere, he wrote to me and he basically said, "Doug, I've got a Saint Cyprian pendant, silver, that I think wants to find a new home. It needs to find a good home." And so Aidan thought of me and he sent me a beautiful Saint Cyprian pendant. When it arrived, it had a friend. So another beautiful silver pendant, and they are, without a doubt, two of my most prized possessions. I wear them constantly. One of them I wear for a certain kind of grimoire-based work, is what I'm going to say. But all of this is to say, Aidan is an incredibly kind, gracious, compassionate person. There's such a lack of good people in the world. I'd like to think that there is quite a few good people within magic, but that as far as these days, you were not going to find a nicer, kinder, more compassionate person than Aidan Wachter. So I know I thank you over email for sending me the Saint Cyprian pendant and the other one, but I'd like to thank you once more in front of my entire audience, the teeming dozens of people that listen to my show. Thank you so much for doing that, Aidan. And
oh no, I'm glad they're in a good home. So
for all your writing, and I'm gonna wrap this episode up by giving you the same curse, which is just don't stop writing, never stop writing, never stop creating. We need voices like yours, and so I hope you don't stop until you drop, truly, and keep it up.
We'll see how it goes.
Aidan, I know this is not the last time we're going to talk to each other, but I really want to thank you for coming on again and again. And if in a couple of years I get you back, and let's not make it as long as, yeah, you said it's almost been 4 years since I had you on the show. Coming up, oh man, was the pandemic even happening? I think we were like right into the early stages or something like that.
I think it was pre-pandemic.
Was it really?
It was. It might have been. Well.
No, I think we were just right in there. Yeah.
September of 2020 that we talked. So we were in it.
Yeah. Oh man. It's well, lots of changes since then. But the one thing that hasn't changed is the awesomeness of Aidan Wachter. So everybody find Aidan's things, find his books, buy his books, read his books, do the things in the book. Try and see if that works, because you can get your own.
They're less entertaining, I hope, than they are useful.
I find them very entertaining as well. And as I've said, I think you're a fantastic writer, and I think you're a fantastic person. And who knows, I might drop by one of these days. There might be a collaboration or some kind of a video of Aidan and Doug in the same room. You never know.
Possible.
It's possible. But Aidan, I want to thank you for coming on again and being so awesome. And I will say this, Aidan, I believe you. I believe you saw D in the mirror. I
don't know why. That too. So that's the weird thing. But again, I did not know that at that time. But the weirdest thing about this, we'll just throw this out there too, is the coolest thing about that was not that. The coolest thing about that was I had this like mind-bending experience there. And to get my head out, I walked down that corridor that it was in at that time and into the room behind it.
Right.
The room behind it at that time was filled with nothing but ancient clocks.
Right.
Which is very interesting if you know anything about Dr. D and his effects on time. Right. So, Mr. D is set Greenwich Mean Time. And I thought that was like, wow, they just accrued around him his shit. Like,
Aidan, this has been an absolute joy, but we got to wrap it up. So I hope everybody enjoyed this show. Thank you again for coming on, and I'm sure we'll have you on again, Aidan.
Absolutely, anytime, Douglas. Thank you.
Wonderful, everybody. That is Unverified Personal Gnosis. Did you learn something? This was an episode about the idea. I hope I Eat Asbestos has got their fill, their mouthful, and I hope they enjoyed this one. But for the regular listeners, I really hope to see you again soon. I want each and every one of you to stay healthy, to stay hopeful, and to stay luminous. Until next time, everybody, ta-ta for now. Take care.